To start it off today, we were going to talk to you about the truckers. The trucker situation is one that I think you watch this and you say, it's amazing that given all the people out there who could have been standing for freedom in this country and in Canada, we are relying on folks who have been carrying the burden in many ways for us for a long time. The truckers kept on going during COVID. They kept the shelves stocked. They kept the food in the grocery store. They made sure the economy kept on rolling. They weren't able to be home hanging out. They weren't able to be Zoomed from the couch. And in Canada, they're actually getting some real results here already. You have truckers have succeeded so far in Saskatchewan province now. They've removed their vaccine pass situation. Quebec was going to have a vaccine tax that has now been abandoned. They've also gotten rid of this guy O'Toole, who was a conservative leader that wasn't getting it done in their parliament. And some leaders in Canada are now, of course, not Justin Trudeau among them, are willing to speak to the truckers and listen to them and their demands. And Clay, I just want to frame it this way, because usually you don't see people who have either conservative or right of center views taking to the streets in action. That's usually something we associate actually with the left. But I'd say this, we have to remind ourselves here, the radicals are the people who refuse normalcy at this point. There is nothing radical about a trucker protest that is demanding normal life, that is demanding an end to madness that has not worked, an end to authoritarianism and tyranny. The radicals, Clay, I would argue, are the people who oppose the truckers in this instance, and we shouldn't let them frame the debate otherwise.
I would encourage United States truckers. Now, the regulations and restrictions in the United States, thanks to the fact that we have federalism in this country, have not been as draconian as they have been in Canada. But I would encourage truckers in the United States to stage their own form of protest, maybe showing up in Washington, D.C., and letting people know what the rest of the country actually thinks about this. Look, the numbers, Buck, are pretty stark in favor of these kind of protests in the United States. I mean, we talked about this, a poll, I believe it was from Monmouth University. 70% of Americans are ready to get back to normalcy. They just want all of the regulations, all of the restrictions gone. People can still choose to do as they see fit for their own health. But 89% of Republicans, 71% of independents, and even 47% of Democrats. And I think that's why you're seeing, in some ways, a bit of a panic in the Biden White House. Because, Buck, they don't know how to dial back down the fear that they have ratcheted up in their base. And they don't know how to deal with the massive numbers of independents, the massive numbers of Republicans, and even the massive numbers of left-leaning, centrist Democrats. 70% of people agreeing in something in America today, particularly something as contentious as COVID. But Team Sanity is winning, and we are winning in what is starting to be a rout. And I think what the truckers are tapping into is, even in Canada, which has obviously been a much more restrictive country than the United States, people want normalcy 100%. Buck, I saw New Zealand, which has tried to adopt a COVID zero policy. I was reading today, they want to be back to 100% normalcy by October. Now, that's too long, but even New Zealand, which is an island that tried to shut itself off from the rest of the world, is saying, hey, we expect to be fully back up and running by October. And let me hit you with this, too. England, Ireland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland in Europe have effectively ended all COVID restrictions. That is 5 different countries in Europe. They have the same levels of education, if not better than our scientists in the United States. And they're all looking at the data and saying it's time to go back to 100% normalcy.
Who is radical here? Right? Listen to what Clay just said for everyone all across the country. You've got European nations who, remember, we used to be told, oh, look what they're doing. They're going into lockdowns, or they're taking these more extreme measures. Forget about Sweden, right? Sweden's crazy. Turned out Sweden was totally not crazy, but they don't bring that up anymore. we're now the most extreme when it comes to children in many ways in the whole world. Maybe Australia is more extreme about kids, but there's no other country that is abusing children with COVID absurdity and insanity more than the United States, which is shameful, utterly shameful. And there was a moment where during these protests, some people are showing up in Ottawa. They're showing up with food for these truckers. And there's some great stuff going on, by the way. Then the media in this country isn't covering this. The fact that the truckers have raised millions of dollars, for one thing. They also are feeding the homeless at these protests. They're clearing out snow for the elderly. I mean, there's video of all this. You can see it. I've seen it. And there was a woman who showed up, and she gives you, I think, a window into what the real concern is here for people who understand communism, Clay, and who lived through communism in the Soviet bloc and went to places like the U.S. and Canada. They have a different perspective on this and what we need to hear. Here's a woman who's a Polish immigrant to Canada named Bernadette meeting with the truckers, and here's what she says about why she's giving them food. Play it.
We brought 1,550 Polish sausages for our truckers. We brought some bread and buns and Polish donuts. And you know what? We know that they drive, so we didn't bring alcohol. But should they request some Polish vodka, we're very happy to bring that too.
Okay, that is wonderful. Why did you do this?
Because we stand behind them. We come from communist country. And we came here because we didn't want to have oppression. We wanted to live in a free country. And for the last 2 years, we're living like prisoners. We are being told to stay at home. We're told not to go to the restaurant, not to go to the church. I mean, this is unbelievable. During communism times, we were able and free to go to the church. And there were times over here where we couldn't. So I really can't take it anymore. So I'm going to be coming here with the food weekly, bi-weekly, every 2 or 3 days until it ends.
She's saying, Clay, they're not free. And she knows what not free means.
She does, Buck. And I feel like because so many people, you're in Miami right now, Buck. State of Florida's free. State of Texas, I was there this weekend, completely free. I live in the state of Tennessee, completely free. And I feel like so many people are being held almost behind enemy lines. I'm going to L.A. on Sunday. I'll be out in California all week. I hear from Californians all the time. I hear from New Yorkers all the time. I hear from people in states and cities where they aren't free. And I think those people need to rise up. I really mean it. They need to rise up. And you're right, Buck. Protests tend to be affiliated with the left. Now, you can point to the Tea Party. Early on, Buck, we had the lockdown protests. Remember in Michigan that started to catch a little bit of I would say, popular support. And then all of a sudden, George Floyd happened and all the protesting, which, by the way, remember all of it. And this was when a lot of you listening to me right now and listening to us, when a lot of you said, I'm done with lockdowns, was when all of the scientists who had been ripping anybody protesting lockdowns about how dangerous it was to have mass protests suddenly said, oh, the BLM protests are okay. They wouldn't let 1,000 people show up in Michigan and honk their horns and drive around the state capitol, but they were fine with tens of thousands of people all over the country, potentially millions, marching in the streets, even in the middle of COVID. And they actually had the scientists okay this as not a public health threat. They were fine with one form of protest, not the other. And a lot of people just said, I'm over this. And that, honestly, a lot of the red states never have gone back, Buck, right? Like, basically since May of 2020, there has been very little difference in my life as someone who lives in the state of Tennessee. My kids went back to school in the fall. By May and June of 2020, this thing was over for a lot of red staters, but that hasn't been the situation in Canada. It hasn't been the situation in Australia. Thank God we got federalism, or otherwise it would have been the situation here.